Okay, check 1 2, check 1 2, testing, testing. Hope you are in the chat. Hope you can hear me. Hope you can see me. Please let me know in the chat how everything's coming through. It's going to be a pretty low-key stream today. It's the first stream of 2024. It might be low-key. It's honestly up to you guys. It's going to be kind of an open topic stream. There are some discussions that have been had on other channels that I wanted to give my commentary on, and I will, but I'm going to wait till maybe next week or the week after. I wanted to start this new year with the first stream of this new year, not as a commentary, but just discussing our plans. This is what I think we did last year, and there are a lot of plans for this upcoming year as well. It's also a year of a lot of change for me, and there's just a lot going on. If you saw my last stream, I recently had my first child, and family is doing very well, but it definitely is a change in life. But very excited for this year. The plans that I've had for this channel have not changed, and we will press on. But I recently had a birthday as well. So last Wednesday, I turned 33. So we might even talk a bit about the number 33. I try not to talk too much about numbers because I'm not somebody who looks at numerology, but I can definitely tell you from my own metaphysics work that that my work does imply that there is objective meaning, or super subjective meaning, if you want to call it, to numbers, and they, depending on where they occur in a metaphysics model, or metamathematical model, you can see what's happening in the model, and then that will tell you oftentimes something about the number. But people tend to spiral a little bit about numbers, so I haven't brought them up too much, and it's something. It's a topic that you have to be a little careful with, just because people spiral about it. I've had people literally message me for very extended periods of time years ago, not so much anymore, which I'm happy about. Just every time they saw a specific number, usually it was 33, and that's why I was hesitant to talk about it today. But it is actually an interesting topic, and I think I do want to talk about it a bit because of what it does seem to mean. So we're going to go over sentient singularity theory a bit for those who are new to this channel and are going to watch this as their first video for due to it being the first stream of the year. And that number is very relevant to my metaphysics work, and it's relevant to a stream that is kind of going to be a reflective stream about what we've done so far, what my plans are going forward, and we're also going to be taking any subjects from you guys in the chat. There is a live chat, yes, Happy New Year, says my wife Paulina. So Happy New Year to everybody watching. I hope everybody had a good holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever it is that was your holidays. But it is a new year, and that means we got to change things up again. It seems like I change things up on this channel quite a bit every 2 years, and I'm planning to do that again this year. It's been 2 years since we kind of jumped up the content a bit, and I plan on doing that again. So for those who are new, I apologize to those of you who have been following this project for a while, this channel is dedicated to discussing metaphysics and physics and learning and mind and consciousness and all these other fields that are related to it. And it's dedicated to discussing the fundamentals of science and of also philosophy and morality and all these other things that branch from this meta field, I guess you could call it, but which I think metaphysics is the best way to describe it. It's even better than metamathematics, just because it's just better. But if you weren't going to call it metaphysics, you could just call it philosophy, but metaphysics is a branch of philosophy. And This project that is a metaphysics project that I've been working on is called Sentient Singularity Theory. And on this channel, I've been explaining my work slowly. I revealed it in very early videos. And while those models have not changed since those videos, the language that I've used to discuss these models has become much more precise and I would say just cohesive, but just better. And I'm trying to, present an updated version of essentially what I did at the beginning of this channel this year. So it's been 4 years since I started this channel, which is an interesting number because 4 is the number of completeness. I guess we're going to start off talking about numbers, guys. And, maybe it's not a coincidence that this seems to likely be the year that, I'm going to be presenting my theories in its totality, or my model and my models in their totalities a bit again, but with updated language and better presentation. But if you do want to see the early videos, they are there. But just bear in mind, I was very new to engaging with others at that point. I hadn't really done that with any of this work. I've been working on it for a few years by myself, but once you start talking to people about this stuff, it really starts to become increasingly apparent that language is so incredibly key. And that was already suggested by my work, but I've been trying to find the best language to describe these things. And unfortunately, our current science is not very well set up for this because of our entire linguistic framework is set up to essentially be geared towards describing things that are not fundamental, because it's a language that is made to be very useful in the physical sense in our scientific language. And that's not a bad thing, but it is holding us back from getting to the bottom of what is most fundamental, which is what is responsible for the observation and the appearance of physicality, or the experience of physicality. That's a better way of describing it even. See, this is why language is so key, because I remember saying, like, I guess materialism is an illusion. I remember saying that years ago, and probably since then. But that's not actually a good way to describe it, because an illusion suggests that it is not true. And that's not even necessarily true. It's just that it's emergent. And so it's physicalism or materialism is part of our experience. And it's not fundamental to our experience, but our experience in the mind that does experience. You are a mind, you have a brain, they are different things. That structure is what is responsible for us observing the physical and our interaction with other minds. So, but our language is very important when describing these things, and it's usually religious language that's better at discussing this stuff. And I talked about this on my last commentary of the year, which was amazing, and I really hope that you go check it out. It was with on the Conversation on Kirchheim Mungel's channel with Joscha Bach and Carl Friston, and that was probably my favorite commentary that I've done so far, and I want to go back and re-listen to it, but it's a very good one, so I highly suggest watching it if you haven't. And if you are new, then maybe start with the commentary on that one. But there's plenty of good ones, but that is a very good one because it's also so recent, and the language that I use in that is probably more concise than most. But what's interesting is that when we talk about math, this is something that's also going to kind of hold us back, because we're talking about math in the same way that we talk about physics. That's why physics and math are so linked. And physics is discussed in a material sense, and we hit a wall because we're not able to discuss what is responsible for the material, the experience or the observation of matter, and we're not even able to discuss what is matter, really. And then, because you can't discuss what is matter without discussing what is responsible for the observation of matter. And so, I mean, if you really think about even just that sentence right there, the answer is in the sentence, but it's very much, science is in a state of denial. It's like, what is responsible for the observation of matter? Well, the answer is, who is responsible for the observation of matter? Is consciousness. Not just you, but other consciousness is God. This kind of denial is also apparent in math, and it's not even just denial. It's the denial is responsible for the lack of progress, or I guess you could say step backwards that we've done in some ways over the past 150 years or so. And it's not that everything has been a step backwards. That's definitely not true. But our understanding of the fundamental has definitely taken a step backwards. And all these things like metaphysics as a term have become taboo because they are associated with religion. And same thing with numerology and astrology and all these things. And I'm not saying that you should go out and study numerology, and I'm not saying that you should go out and study astrology. I don't know. That's up to you. Everybody's on their own journey. I don't study them, but not really. But I know people that do, and there's something to them. There really is. They're not, and it's funny because we'll say math is real and numerology is not, but the reality is that these are two different things. They're not competing fields. And same thing with astrology and astronomy. And astrology and numerology are studies of the meaning of that is associated with certain cosmological events and instances. And then also you have numerology, which is responsible, which attempts to study the meaning of the instances in which a number would pop up, or what the meaning of that number is. And this seems like it's, to most people, and including me, for most years of my life, decades of my life, I thought it was complete nonsense. And like I said, I actually am not suggesting that you study them. If you do, then that's fine. I'm not going to tell you not to, but just, and as with anything, it is important to just be, I guess, I don't want to say cautious, but rigorous, and also just to keep a healthy distance. I don't want to say be a skeptic, because that's not what you should be, but that doesn't really make sense when it comes to thinking. But it's whenever you're looking at the meaning of things, it can be easy to almost give up your agency in a way, and that's not a good thing ever. So it's good. That's why, like, when it comes to certain things like numbers, if we're going to talk about the meaning of them, which we will tonight a bit, then it's just important to, if you notice them, you can tell yourself, I notice this. I see that this number has turned up here. 33 has turned up. And it popped up a lot this past week in my life, in ways that were all over the place. Like, I don't even know if I'm comfortable discussing them all, but at least not here. But it popped up a lot, and yeah, you're gonna notice. People say, well, you're just gonna notice that more because you're turning 33 or whatever. And that's partially true, but that doesn't mean that numbers don't have intrinsic meaning. And but if you do see a number, you wake up and it's, I don't know, it's like 3:33 in the morning or 4:32 in the morning or whatever number it is that you think about, and you notice that, and just notice it and be like, okay, I notice it. And if you don't know what it means in that moment, if it's not obvious to you, then that's okay. Just be like, I notice it. It means something. I don't know what it means. But keep living your life. So that's kind of a disclaimer. And if we're ever going to talk about numerology, or not numerology, the meaning of numbers, because I don't look at numerological websites or books or anything like that. But that doesn't mean that I can't show you what seems to suggest in my work that numbers have intrinsic meaning. It's inevitable. It is inevitable. But if meaning exists, then meaning is tied to any kind of structured information, and numbers are the foundation of information in many ways. Like the quantities are they contain information. There's information contained within different quantities. There is one website that I will show you guys that we can look at tonight, that if you want to talk about a number, this is the website that I do look at when I am looking at numbers, and when it pops up in my work, and it's called Numbermatics. This is awesome. This is a website with way too many ads on it, but that just tells you the property of numbers. So if you wanted to look at, let's say, 33, and it'll show you kind of a geometric picture of the number. It'll tell you the prime factorization. It'll say, this is a visual representation, shows a relationship between two prime factors, large circles, and four divisors. So it has four divisors and two prime factors, and it will show you the scientific notation, the sum of the prime factors, the list of divisors, the number of divisors, sum of the divisors, all these different things. It's square, so it's a very good website. It tells you the properties that are contained within a given quantity. This is much more interesting to me than reading a numerological website, because you're not relying on someone's opinions or biases, and I'm not saying that those are never correct, but those websites, but I don't know where they got that. But this, you can know where they got this information. There's, this is just the mathematical properties of a number, but those properties can tell you something when they are placed within the correct context. So what is that context? We're going to get into that. I would love to hear more your thoughts on numerology and synchronicity, specifically one, if synchronicity exists, and how to determine if numerology just availability heuristics versus genuine synchronicity. Okay, well, here's what I kind of said this, but that's a great question. I'm reading the chat, by the way. If you're not aware and you're watching this, there's a live chat, and I highly suggest that you join. But before you do that, and even if you are in that, please hit the like button, and it really helps fuel the algorithm. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. But yeah, let's get into numerology, I guess, tonight. What is numerology? Well, just out of curiosity, let's look it up. I don't even know the definition, but I know it kind of, it's the meaning of numbers, I would think, but it's the study of mystical relationships between numbers, letters, and patterns. In most methods of divination, numerology is a tool used to gain a deeper knowledge of the self and how we relate to the world at large. Okay, fair enough. And that's basically seems true, but I don't know where they got these numbers, but people look to scriptures and things like that, and I understand that as a source. But if you don't read scriptures, then maybe that's that wouldn't really appeal to you as a source of information on this stuff. But what I will say is that context is information. So when you're looking at the meaning of a number, it's always going to be the context that tells you the meaning. So when I say 4 is the number of stability, I'm not the first person that has said that, something along these lines. Countless people have said this, but it definitely seems apparent to my theory. When you look at the 4 primary perspectives, inside, outside, separate, and oneness, they are the 4 entangled perspectives that result in self-awareness, that are responsible for self-awareness, or necessary to self-awareness, or part of self-awareness, or of awareness at all, which is self-awareness. And so um, it requires these four primary perspectives, and you can look at a car. Even why do cars usually have four wheels? Why does a shopping cart and a stroller have four wheels, and a table have four legs, and a chair have four legs usually? And it seems to be the minimum number necessary for the maximum amount of stability. You don't gain any stability by going up another number of legs or wheels, but you do lose stability if you go down one. So if you go to 3, a tricycle is less stable than a quad, essentially. I mean, I'm not talking about just like the machines that you ride around on, but to some degree, yes, you can see that. Quads are a bit top heavy, but tricycles are not even used, motorized tricycles usually, if that's even what you would call them. But it's four is the, it has this property which we see it everywhere, where it's the minimum number for the maximum amount of stability. You can see this even in the four forces in physics, and with gravity and electromagnetism and the strong force and the weak force. And you can see this in even if you are a shooter and you know firearms at all. There's 4 rules of safety when you are shooting a firearm, and it's very interesting that it's do not put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire. Know your target and what's beyond it, and treat every gun as if it is loaded, and never point at anything that you're not willing to destroy. I'm glad I got that. But what's interesting about these is that if you're going to hurt somebody in an accident, or then what you do is you have to break all 4 of them. If you break 3 of them or 2 of them, you're going to be, or even 1 of them, you'll be embarrassed, probably, and depending on, and the embarrassment will be dependent upon how big of a mistake it was, how many of those you broke. But if you break 3 of them, it doesn't matter which 3. You will just be embarrassed. You have to break all 4 to have an accident where somebody gets hurt. And it's interesting that this is inside, outside, separate, and oneness. And so oneness is also kind of the all-encompassing of inside, outside, and separateness. And so is this treat every gun as if it is loaded, is all-encompassing of don't put your finger on the trigger till you're ready to fire, don't point it at anything that you're not willing to destroy, and know your target and what's beyond it. So this type of thing is apparent everywhere. Look at physics. You have gravity is not able to, in the same way as the other 4 fundamental forces, be unified. So you can unify the strong force and the weak force and electromagnetism, but you can't unify them with gravity in the traditional sense. At least they are struggling to still do it. And that implies that there's something different about that one. It's almost like it's all-encompassing of the others. It's coming from a different perspective, I guess. And so this same structure of 4, but even the way in which this 4 kind of emerges is apparent kind of all over the place. And it seems to suggest stability or completeness. So you could call it that. And that is, you can see that in the context in which it appears all over the place. You can see the same thing with every number. Some numbers are much easier than others, like 4 or 1 or 2 even, or 3, but some of them are much more difficult, like, I don't know, 31 or something like that, or 358 or whatever. Like, there are some numbers that are much more difficult to see the context that they manifest in, because it's likely much more specific. And but some of these numbers, especially 1, 2, 3, 4, they're going to show up all over the place, but again and again in similar patterns, in similar instances. And so you can see this a lot with linguistics. Like, this is like one of the best places to look. And I'm sure that another place is music, but I'm not the most musically literate person. That's something that is a plan of mine for 2024. But I know that music is probably the closest thing that we have to a universal language. And so when I remember though in my music class, or when you're dancing or something, like the count is usually like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like, why is it that? It's because that's the number of completeness, so it's just interesting. But this is what true meaning in numbers comes from. It doesn't come from a website or anything like that, and not saying that they don't have it right as far as what they're describing the meaning as, but you should look for first-hand information always above second-hand information, and don't rely on second-hand sources of information for the most serious things in your life. And this is what is usually the problem with like astrology or numerology or all kinds of other things too, like in science, that we don't think about as being secondhand information sources that really screw us, but they do every single day. And as much as you should be skeptical of what you read about numerology and astrology, you should also be skeptical about everything that you read scientifically, unless it already aligns with your firsthand experience. And that is the most important thing. So when it comes to synchronicities, like you asked, are they real? They're absolutely real. They're absolutely real. And what they are is essentially just instances of entanglement and or alignment between beings. So there are certain people that this happens to me with all the time. There's also instances in your life where just you can see synchronicities, where when I met my wife, there was a synchronicity that we were like, it was like looking in the mirror, where we were opposites in all the ways that were very obvious, but we were very similar in the ways that were deep and mattered most. And I've talked about that on my stream that I did with her, or also I think on the metaphysics of marriage. And it's interesting, there's this quote that I remember from the movie Hitch, and they make fun of it in the movie as being just too cheesy, but it said that think that it's like your true love is, or that love is your soul's recognition of its counterpoint in another, something like that. And this is true, but it's true for true love. True love is not just a feeling. It's a beingness. It's a being. You have to be it. To love is an action and a being as well as a feeling. It's all three of these things at once, and it's not just a feeling. So everybody thinks that they've had that love. We're very cavalier with the term love today, and I think that it comes from just media needing a word that means like, I care about you so much, but without having the time to show what that really means. You don't. I've said this before, but I don't think that people always said I love you. I think that if you went back hundreds of years, people didn't say it. Thousands of years, people didn't say it very much. It was you didn't need to. You just didn't need to. If you showed up every day and you took care of your family and you protected them and you provided for them, or you're a wife and you're caring for your children and caring for your husband, caring for your family and your home, that is, love. You don't need to say it. Side tangent, but synchronicities occur when people are aligned. And so you'll see that a lot with people who you are meant to have in your life, or that at least for a while. And I have friends that are like this too, where I'll barely speak to them for months, and then I'll check in with them and we'll be focused on the same exact topic, like even the number 33 or something like that. And that's a synchronicity, and it's because we're focused in the same direction. That's what is happening. You can think about yourself as a particle in this cosmos that is this spinning washing machine or whirlpool, essentially, of filled with beings in it. And when those beings are focused in the same direction, they'll time up and you'll just be in lockstep to some degree. And that's a synchronicity. Or a synchronicity with somebody else, but you can also have a synchronicity with God in a way where all of a sudden something occurs in your life that you've been thinking about a lot, and this happens all the time, sometimes more often than others. And you asked, how do you know if it's true synchronicity or if you're just reading into it? And this is the same thing with numbers that you see in your life, or any kind of instance in which you see in your life, and you're like, what is the meaning of this? Does this mean that I shouldn't do this? And I had one of those recently, and but you don't know exactly why some of these things happen sometimes. But if you are going to know, then it will be obvious to you in the moment in which it happens that this is what it means. And if it's not obvious to you, then I wouldn't focus on it too much, because if it's that important, it will be revealed to you what its meaning was. You don't have to go and spiral for hours online about like what these numbers represent or what this moment in your life represents. If you don't already know in the moment, then you might not be meant to know exactly what it means in that moment. So everything has meaning. Everything. Every number that you see, every letter that you see, every instance of your life, every experience that you have, every person that you meet, everything has meaning. That doesn't mean that everything has the meaning that you think it does, but everything does have meaning. And so when people ask, like, how do you know if a number has meaning when you see it in your life? It absolutely always has meaning. But that doesn't mean that you know what it means, and that doesn't mean you're even meant to know what it means. And that's what you have to remember. So even asking the question, what does this mean something? That's a bad question when it comes to numbers or instances of your life or synchronicities. It's you either will know what it means in the moment, or you won't. And maybe it's meant for you to just notice, and then you'll have another instance in which it becomes more clear what that one instance that was previous meant, and so you can have that happen. But it's not something to spiral about ever. God is going to reveal to you the things that you need to know. I wouldn't say deny. You shouldn't be in denial of the things that you see, and we all do this, where it's like, oh man, that means something. Our first instinct is that doesn't mean something good, and it's very clear why. Maybe if it's not very clear, then I wouldn't think much on it. But if it is very clear, then a lot of times people will be like, well, maybe not actually, and they'll justify it away. I do this. Everybody does this, and we should probably try not to do that either. But I wouldn't make decisions in your life, major decisions, based on any of this type of stuff. That's not the right way to use this. It's not a method that you should be using to make serious decisions or anything like that. But it is something to notice, and it's definitely true. So, but if we look at what's interesting here is that, we can look, though. 33 has 4 divisors. There's something complete about this number that is definitely there. And so, primes, we have to think about what primes are first if we're going to think about numbers, because I think that primes represent, and this is a hypothesis of mine, and I'm still working on it, but it seems obvious. But it's just, I don't know how to model this. But primes are numbers where it seems to imply that's the number where a sentience is generated. Every sentient being or sentient singularity is a prime. And that means that it is divisible by only one in itself. So you are an assembly of cells. We don't know how many, because they're constantly dying and constantly being born, but you are one. So you are almost like one and infinity in a way. And what's interesting is that infinity is more a concept of growth, of starting with one and going forward infinitely. But you're not really infinite because there's a point in which you die and all your cells die. Um, but there's maybe ways that you could think about this as just a constant. You as a being is constant growth, or the cosmos as a being is constant growth of singularities within itself. That is infinity, and so infinity is not complicated. It's like we make it. It's not a static number. It's a dynamic process, and so, but it is a prime, and it's only divisible by one in itself. It's always divisible by one in itself. You know that because infinity is infinite singularities again and again and again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, on and on and on and on forever. That is a bunch of ones. It's divisible by one always, and it's always divisible by itself, but it's not divisible by anything else. One is, it's like the prime. It's divisible by one, which is itself. And it's like the super prime number. If that's probably already a mathematical term, but it's usually not counted as a prime. It's like the initial unit or something like that. Is how people think about it usually, I think, or people label it. But it is prime. It's absolutely prime. One is a prime number. It's the prime number. But if you think about what a sentient being is, it's a sentient singularity. It's one that within creation is composed of multiple, and but if you think about on a level of consciousness, I'm only divisible by one and myself in a way, and so prime numbers would represent, at least in part, consciousness or sentience, and that is I'm not exactly sure how that plays out yet. I'm still working on it, but I'm not even sure I'll ever figure it out, but I have to assume that I might, and so otherwise you'll never try. But it's interesting because it almost seems like when you start looking at mathematics or metaphysics, that prime numbers are where everything starts, and everything else is arranged around prime numbers, essentially, or is for the sake of prime numbers. And that is obvious, though, because when you look at numbers, you're like, what is the first number? What is the eternal number? It's 1. What is the next number? 2 prime again. What is the next number? 3 prime again. And so you have these like 3 consecutive primes, and then you get, I don't know, the appearance of materialism after that, where like we have 4 kind of 4 dimensions, time, 3 of space, 1 of time. So again, you have these 3 within 1, which is 4. This number of completeness is the also the dimensions in materialism or physically observed universe. So it's just context is information, as I've said. So this is how you can find out, or you can see the meaning of a number, and numbers have different meanings. They have multiple meanings. The same number can have multiple meanings. So being that I turned 33, and it's a very, very common number to spiral about, maybe we'll spiral about it tonight a bit, and because it pops up all over the place, and people point to Freemasonry and all, I don't know, all these other things where 33 pops up, and I'm going to just show you in sentient singularity theory where it pops up. You can look at the Bible too. Jesus died or ascended, depending on how you're looking at it, at 33 years old. And that's a very interesting thing. None of this means nothing. It's like, does that mean anything? Yes, it means something. That doesn't mean you will know everything about what it means, but it means something. It doesn't mean you are meant to know what it means. It means something. So with that, let me read the chat again. can you talk about first, second, and third person perspective? I see them as fundamental, art, moral, science, etc. in order for reality to choose the causation. Also, thanks for doing this. I think your perspective is extremely accurate for your channel. Is a paragon of truth. Thank you. I'm a 3-man. Okay. I don't know exactly what you mean, but that's an interesting number. You're thinking about limitations on theorizing about everyone or everything if the observer has a specific sample rate or experience of the world and a biased language to communicate from. We definitely do. But that's why we need multiple people in the world, because nobody understands it all. And if there was one person that understood it all, then he probably died at 33 years old. Do you know of integral theory by Ken Wilber? I have heard of it. People have messaged me about it, and they've told me that his theory is built on 4 different fundamental, I guess, I don't know the details of it, and that my work reminded of Ken Wilber's. Maybe I will do a stream on Ken Wilber's stuff eventually, but I haven't looked enough into them in a while. I just looked it up once, and I remember seeing like he has like 4 different things that his theory is built on. And I remember being like, yeah, that aligns with my work, but I'd have to look more into it before I did a stream on it. So you might say synchronicity is a function or / proportional to love. It's a function of love in a way. God is love, but God is loving as well. God is both. He's the dweller and the dwelling. So he's love and he's loving. And so when he's moving us and aligning us with people in our lives and moments in our lives, it is an act of love. And even if it's judgment, it's an act of love. Somebody said to me recently about just something that they were like, I wonder if that's like to experience that, whatever it was that we were talking about, was a curse. And it's like to be religious, to be anything, any part of any group, like, would be a curse. And I don't know, a curse to be white, a curse to be black, a curse to be Jewish, a curse to be Christian, a curse to be Muslim. Like, is it a curse to be any of these things? And the reality is that almost everything that you experience in life is a curse and a blessing at the same time. And that's, or having any trait is a curse and a blessing at the same time. I'll say that. Not everything is a curse and a blessing, but having any kind of trait is a curse and a blessing. Being tall is a curse and a blessing. Being short, I can definitely tell you from firsthand experience, is a curse and a blessing. But being highly intelligent is a curse and a blessing. Being ignorant is a curse and a blessing. It's bliss, but it's also, limiting. So this is, but keep that in mind when thinking about like how to interpret certain things in your life too. And curse is just when it's coming from a being that loves you more than you can love yourself, which is absolutely true. Even if it's judgmental, it's not for the sake of it's not out of hatred for you. It is out of love still. Parents punish their children, but a good parent doesn't punish their children just because they're angry and they have a reason to do it, and it's for the sake of the child's well-being. And God is the best parent, so it's important to remember that. But that still sucks to experience judgment sometimes. But what do you mean by meaning? I mean, what I mean by meaning, meaning is when it means, we use it in multiple ways. There's objective meaning. I did a whole stream on this years ago, but I forgot what it was. Or there's like, there's the meaning that we want in life. There's like, I want a meaningful life. I want my life to mean something. I want meaning in my life. There's that kind of meaning. And then there's meaning insofar as just information that can be understood. So that's what I mean by when does a number that pops up or an instance in your life or synchronicity in your life have meaning? Yes. What kind of meaning? Information that could be understood. Doesn't mean that it can be understood by you. Maybe not. But it's understood by someone for sure. And so that's what I mean by meaning, is that it's occurring for a reason. You know, there's nothing that happens randomly without any purpose. It might not be. Everything happens intentionally. It's just a matter of whose intentions are responsible for certain aspect of an action or a certain event. That's the question, not whether or not it means anything. Of course it does. I mean, if sentience is fundamental, then intentionality is what is responsible for all instances and moments in multiplicity, or within experience outside of just God's experience with himself beyond creation, which we are already in creation, so we don't need to worry about that. But for us, it's either our intentions that cause it. You know, I go to Chick-fil-A because I want to get some, a chicken sandwich or something and a lemonade. Like, although I'm not a big fan of their lemonade, but there's a reason why I'm there. I don't just accidentally end up at Chick-fil-A. But if I did accidentally end up at Chick-fil-A for some reason, I don't know how that would happen, it means that someone else's intentions are responsible for me getting to Chick-fil-A. And it's probably, God. And if it's not your intentions that is responsible for something that is big, not just, or that seems like an accident almost, then it's usually would be God, God's intentions who's responsible for it. Probably. Not necessarily always, but, his intentions will trump everyone else's. And if it's not your intentions that did it, and it's not some other human being's obvious intentions, then it's going to be up to God. So, if there's a tragedy that happens because somebody commits an act that's horrible, that's one thing, some human. But if a tragedy happens and it's an accident, on our part as humans, it's probably not. That doesn't mean it's not intentional. It just means it's not our intentions. It might be God's intentions. Might be demonic intentions or something like that. I don't know. But is someone's intentions always. I had an interesting synchronicity yesterday. I was reading and watching two different things at the same time. They both used the word atheist at the same time, one criticizing the other, proclaiming. Interesting. My favorite is being blessed is a curse and a blessing, kind of a norm joke. Interesting. I haven't heard that. But so let's talk about 33, I guess. So in the context of sentient singularity theory, let's go to the first model which is this. This is the model of creation. It's a creation function, I guess you could call it. And this is showing us what is occurring when God decides to create the universe or create multiplicity of consciousness. And so you start with one, this one right here, and everything else is being calculated. So you can see that if I remove this, then everything changes here. And this is different because it's coming from below. But and so what this is it is just a function that's returning certain I guess answers dependent upon the operation's characteristics or the results of the operation. So what's happening is this. You have to think about it like this. God, imagine you're God, and you're all that exists. You are existence itself. There is no one and nothing outside of you. You are everything and everyone. And there is no one else, though, yet. There is no sky, there is no planet, there is no dirt or trees or people or anything like that. It's just you. And you are the void, essentially, but you're not a void. There is no void. And you have to create within yourself because you want meaning, capital M meaning, meaning I want my life to have meaning. Because you are already existing, you can't help it because you have existences all encompassing, which means and if there's information in it, then it can only reference itself, and it's completely self-referencing, which is the same thing as self-awareness. So God is eternally locked in self-awareness. God could not kill himself if he tried, okay? Or cease to exist if he tried. He just couldn't. He exists. He is, and he can't not be. And so there's no time, but there's no future either because there's no change. There's just you by yourself. Meaningless. Completely meaningless. Because there's no one to impact. Because sentience is all that matters. And that's true because you are all that exists if you're God and you're sentience. So nothing else matters because there is nothing else. So sentience can only be the only thing that matters, which means that your impact on sentience is the only thing that would be meaningful. And there is no way to impact sentience if you're all that there is, because there's no one else to impact, and you aren't able to be impacted by anyone else either because there is no one else. So you're just locked in this state of truly being meaningless and alone. And I don't think sentient beings want to be alone, even God. And that's pretty obvious, I would say. Otherwise, why create? Partially. But, it's funny, and I've said this before, is we can feel meaninglessness and we can feel alone, but we're never alone, and we are never meaningless because we had meaning already. Otherwise, there's no reason that we would be here. Every single partition of sentience from God's oneness is intentional, and it has to be because that his oneness is the default, and he has to go against the default in order to create you and me and even mosquitoes, which I don't know why he did that. But he has to swim upstream to do it. He has to go against what is normative for him and his nature, which is oneness. And that takes intentional effort. And so how is he going to do this, though? Because he can't create someone that's outside of him, because he is all that exists. He is sentient existence itself. So he has to create another being within himself, whereas we can create another being next to us. First, they start as inside of us. You begin in the womb, but then or if you're a cell, the other one begins inside the other one, and then they divide, and that's how it happens. And so, but eventually you end up with a cell next to another cell, or a human next to another human. God can't do this because he is all that exists. Everything has to be created within himself. So this creates an extraordinary mathematical constraint. And he has to basically give an amount of himself to creation within himself that leaves enough left over after this partition that what is left over after is able to contain that which was partitioned. Okay, so he's dividing himself, and whatever he splits off from himself has to be able to fit with what's left over, fit within what is left over. And so if you're one, and you give all of your energy, which would be one, you divide yourself by one, you divide one by one, to creation, you no longer exist. Creation exists, but you're still stuck with one. Okay? There's no multiplicity. This is like when Kylo Ren in the last Star Wars movie, which was just horrible, but still, Rey dies at the end, and he gives all of his energy to Rey, and he brings her back to life, but he dies. That would be what God would be doing, and there's no purpose to that in this instance of initial creation, because the purpose is to create meaning, which means there has to be multiplicity. In Star Wars, it doesn't matter. There's already multiplicity. But in this instance of the initial act of creation, you need to have multiplicity. And so God can't do that. And you still would just be stuck with a single sentient being, and there's no change, actually. So now he tries to divide himself by 2. So he gives half of his energy to creation, half of himself to creation, partitions, but then he's left over with half. But this doesn't work because he needs what's left over to be able to fit with what he partitioned. And if you split it 1 in half, you have 50% and 50%. And 50% does not fit within 50% and leave anything left over, really. It doesn't fit. You need something smaller, a partition that is smaller than what is left over. And basically, because you're starting with 1, you have this other super constraint where first you have to start with just conceptually 1. 1 divided by 1 doesn't work. 1 divided by 2, you have to go to the next one. Doesn't work. Now you can try 3 because you didn't, as 1, 2, or 3 didn't even exist as a concept yet. Okay, there was this, we're talking about a point in existence where 4 doesn't even exist as a number. 5 doesn't even exist as a number. 10 doesn't even exist as a number yet. Okay, this is where numbers are being created even because this is metaphysically where quantities are being created. And so the next step, though, is that he tries 3. So he divides his energy by 3, and he puts 1/3 of his energy or his beingness into creation, which now you have a stable structure because it fits within the 2/3 that he keeps for himself that's left over, okay? So I need to, if you know how to program, and you could program like the visuals of this happening, like a ball dividing itself and by 1 and then 2 and then 3, and it showing this how this doesn't work until you hit 3, that would be awesome. And you should definitely send me a private message on Instagram. This, now you have a stable structure. So this is what this is testing right here. So you take this 1 and here you're dividing, basically, is this function resulting in 2 parts where 1 is smaller than the other. That's what's happening here to describe. See, you can see where is this number going to be bigger, smaller than this number, and to return true if that's the case. And it doesn't, so it doesn't there. This number is not smaller than this number. They're the same size. But here, this number 30, which is 1/3, which is 0.3 repeating, 33% essentially, is smaller than 66% or 2/3, 66.6 repeating versus 33.3 repeating. So what's happened here is we can see you end up with a stable structure, and that is where God has been able to create a stable creation within himself. It's the same thing as when it says on an airplane, before you're assisting a child, put your mask on first, because you have to have enough energy for yourself after the division in order to maintain sovereignty, to maintain your existence, and to also be able to have enough to animate what is within you. So your energy has to be more or your beingness has to be more than what is what you gave to creation within yourself. And because it has to metaphysically fit, it has to metaphysically be requiring of less energy in order for it to be animated, less energy than you have for it to be animated, because then you have to animate yourself and it. And this is the same thing as like put your mask on first before assisting the child next to you. Because if you pass out, you can't put the mask on the kid and then everybody's gone. But that won't happen to God, but everybody but him would be gone. And that is what's the point of going through this. So he's doing this for a reason. So we see the instance in which 1/3 pops up for the first time, which is 33. And so it occurs in an instance of creation. Of what? Of sentience. Because it's an instance of fundamental creation, and sentience is fundamental. So the number 33 has something to do with sentience, which is self-awareness, and something to do with creation. Okay? Because of where it pops up in this model. This metaphysical fundamental model. You don't need to go look it up on some website. I'm not saying that they're wrong. Like I said, they probably would say this on there or something like this. But what this is telling me is that 33 or 1/3 is associated with self-awareness and creation, at least, or reflection. And I think that this is a good thing to kind of do a stream on tonight, because I want to be a bit reflective about where we've been with this channel and think about where we're going. But and also it was my birthday. But you know, and it's interesting. You sit there and you're like, well, what does this number mean in my life? And at first honestly, like, there were just a lot of instances in which it popped up in my life, and some of them were good and some of them were not. They appeared not to be over the week of that I turned 33. And then so I didn't know how to take this, and I was trying not to take it any certain way. But then I decided, I was like, you know, I'm going to look at my work, because this is firsthand experience that I can see. And I knew what it represented, but I was just thinking about it already. I was like, okay, what does it represent in my work? Because that's what matters. Because then I thought about Jesus too, and it's like, somebody told me, they were like, well, you know, Jesus died at 33. And I was like, yeah, I know, that doesn't seem like a great number. But then the reality is that, you know, did he really die? If you're Christian or Muslim, or, you know, and you believe that he is the Messiah and coming back, or did he just get a promotion? A painful promotion, but a promotion, a rebirth. You know, it's like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And so it's hard to interpret these things. And then I was like, okay, everything can be a curse and a blessing, or a lot of things can be curses and blessings. And but everything is for the good eventually. That's the point. That has to be remembered always too. So I kind of just stopped spiraling about it, and I just looked at my work and I was like, okay, you know what? It's a number that represents creation, and it is a number that represents self-reflection, and that has a lot of things that go along with that, and that's very apparent everywhere that you know, see it pop up. But you can see this in this instance, it pops up there. So another model that we look at is this one, the quantum of consciousness model. This is another calculative model. If I go and you can see here, if I go to creation, you can see that this is kind of creating, and then you get to this number here, and I have this other model right here that's growing from the bottom up, whereas this is coming from the top down, kind of. And you can, you know, go like this, and you can go like this, and everything kind of disappears except one, because you can't get rid of one. It has to exist. But and you can't not start with one always, because it is all that exists. And so you have to start with one here. You have to start with one here. It is the eternal beginning spot. There is no zero in metamathematics as an empty set, or metaphysics as an empty set. There is no empty set in consciousness or in fundamentality, because sentience always existed. And we're not talking about the physical anymore. So zero is a number that is used in mathematics to help us use mathematics as a language, that is essentially a tool to help us make predictions and understand the physical world. And yes, it seems like it's applicable to the non-physical world, where we call them higher dimensional shapes and things like that. And you know, people talk about tesseracts and all kinds of things. And it is applicable to that type of stuff, but you're getting into a different types of structures. You're talking about the structures of mind at that point. And that doesn't mean they don't transfer over to being related to the physical. They absolutely have to. But it is, you're talking about something else. So when you're talking about Calabi-Yau manifolds and things like that, even in string theory, it's probably talking about mental structures, not physical structures. But physical structures are reflections of mental structures always. And so, so this second model that you can see is attached to the creation model here is this. It's quantum of cognition, which was originally called the quantum of consciousness. And I don't know which one to use, honestly. And I changed it from this because I thought it was too cliche. But it is also the most accurate one. And so we have this, though. And what this is I was trying to just very early on see how information was built kind of fundamentally. And so when you start with 1, I was trying to make symmetrical model that took only information from here and used it to build other levels of information. And then on the outside, this is multiplication always, and then this is addition. So addition, multiplication, multiplication, multiplication. It's interesting that 6 is both the middle number on both of them. But and then this one is addition, but you have to treat it a little funky because it's like the Fibonacci sequence. You have to go 1 and then 1. You have to add the initial unit to itself in order to kickstart the process, and it's not really necessary to model into mathematics here, but it is here. And so what's interesting is you get these very interesting numbers, 3, 6, and 9, and 24 and 6 and 2, and but what's interesting is that you get 33 here, which is like the summation of the information that is calculated within the mental structure here once you reach completeness, which is what's very interesting is that you have a 3x3 grid here that is generating. So when I built this, I didn't make a 3x3 grid. I started with just this. And then I was like, okay, well, here, let's just go like this. And maybe 36. Okay. And so I was trying to just do this symmetrically. So you can do, I don't know, this is equal to this, and this is equal to this. And then this one would be this plus this, essentially. You could do that. And then, you can just do this plus this. And then, so whatever I do on one side, I have to do the other, because that's symmetry, and that's what you have to work with when you're talking about fundamentality. And here, there's a few different ways that you can, here, I'm kind of being thrown off here. So, wait, no. This would be this plus this, and this would be plus this plus this. And then here we can have this plus this, essentially. Or you can do this. So if we're going to make it symmetrical, like let's do this. It's the same numbers you're going to get. So you're using the previous numbers to get to the next number, and you have to do it symmetrically. So if I do this here, then I have to do this here. I can't do this is now this plus this here. But I could, if I wanted to do that, I could do that, but I have to do it where now it's the same as the other one, where it's symmetrical. So now you can see that there's symmetry, and you can do that. That's fine. But in this one, you can do that, or interestingly enough, you can also do is equal to times this, but I usually do is equal to this plus this, because I've done plus addition for all the others. So that's how the grid was built. But what was interesting is that I was also tracking what was being calculated within that. So here and here, and this is addition and this is multiplication. So I wanted a model that was adding and multiplying at the same time, because that's growth of information. Mathematically, it's addition and it's multiplication. So I wanted a model that was doing both at the same time. And then what I ended up with was the exterior information, when summed together, was 33. And what's interesting about this is it's a 3x3 grid. Okay? So and this was interesting to me because it seems like if I told you to think about yourself, you would think about yourself in this like abbreviated version. And imagine this is a mind, which is what it kind of is meant to be representative of. It's not a mind, but it's a representation of a mind, of a mental structure, a mental process. And what's interesting is once you got to 4 here, which is the number of stability, and I didn't do any of this on purpose. I didn't even know, I wouldn't have even told you 4 is the number of stability or completeness at this time when I made this. But it just became apparent. So when you reach this number of completeness, you also end up with a grid that's 3x3, which is another way of saying 33 is, if I had to describe what is 33 in terms of just like looking at it, it's a 3x3. 3x3. This is a 3x3. And so I call this an extra arithmetic symmetry. So people will say, this doesn't mean anything. It's just a weird math coincidence. Wrong. That starts from the fundamental premise that nothing means anything. Okay? Which means that they can't say some things mean something and some other things mean nothing. Either everything means something, everything has meaning, or nothing has meaning. If nothing has meaning and that's the world model that you have, there's a lot of metaphysical issues with that model will unravel. If sentience is fundamental, then everything means something. That doesn't mean that everything has meaning to you in the way that you are meant to know. But everything has intentionality, which means it has meaning. God chose to create the universe. He might not have had much of a choice in how, because there's extraordinary constraints when you start with oneness. But he had to choose to do it because any partition from oneness is against God's nature, because existence by definition or by oneness, or existence by definition or by nature, you could say, is one. There's only one existence, not multiple existences. There's one. And so any action that goes against this concept has to be intentional. It's like a salmon has to choose to swim upstream. It doesn't just naturally swim upstream. The stream moves it downstream. You have to choose to go upstream if you're going to go against the flow. And but this extra arithmetic symmetry is very interesting, and it seems to be this is a abbreviated reflection of this structure. So when I tell you, think about yourself, whatever pops up in your head is a little avatar of yourself or whatever. It's like this, and this is you, and this is what's in your mind of you. And it's interesting that it occurs all when there's this number here. There's so many numbers that occur here in this model that transfer up into other structures of mind that just again and again and again appear in the same places, and can tell you a little bit about what they represent. So 33 here represents what? Self-reflection or self-awareness, which is interesting because it also seems to represent that in creation, because it's 1/3 of God's energy is put into creation, which is creation of what? Creation of additional sentiences, of an additional sentient being. And I have this theory that the first created being is created in the Bible, or is discussed in the Bible in being created in Genesis when it says, "Let there be light." That is when the first created being creation comes into being. But it's not a creation that is a non-sentient. It's a sentient creation. The universe, essentially, you could call it, or the cosmos, or creation. This is what's so hard, is like we call this, the universe, but like nobody knows whether or not it's universe even means that it's whatever we can observe, but then beyond that, maybe there's another universe, and then there's a multiverse, and so, but does the multiverse contained within the universe because uni means one, and does that mean there's only one? And it's so tough because these terms don't actually apply when thinking about things fundamentally. And so it's very hard to go beyond them. And but when you think about religious communities and they're like creation, okay, that makes sense. And you could say sentient creation. Creation is sentient. Okay, the cosmos is a single sentient being that is creation itself. Okay, this is like much easier. But if you say creation, you're going to be kicked out of the sciences and branded as a kook. So you can't. You're linguistically bound, and that also prevents you from understanding these the meta mathematics of the fundamental structure of existence, which is necessary to understand even better the emergent structures of existence that are physically or materially observed. And it's funny, somebody when people say like materialism is an illusion, and I said that in one of my earliest streams on here or videos on here, which is why we're going to release updated ones this year. And what's interesting is that on this model, on the fourth number that when 4 occurs in this right here, this quantum of consciousness model, on the fourth number internally, and the 30 where 4 is manifested or created or emerges internally, and 33 emerges externally, you get kind of this completeness. This is the 4th year of this channel. I'm just thinking about this now. I mean, I mentioned it at the beginning of the stream, but it took me starting this stream to realize that I didn't think about this being the 4th year of this channel because I started it in 2020, and I turned 33 in the 4th year of this channel. So that's just interesting. I'm not saying that I know exactly what that means, but it's clear that it means something similar to like this, or it's related to this in some ways. It's like there's this, and it lines up with my plans for this project, being stepped up this year in a way that they've not yet, and so we'll see what happens. But I didn't make decisions based on this, though. This is what's so important to remember. Don't look for numbers to make decisions. You can notice them, and sometimes you'll know what they mean, and sometimes you won't. But they should not be used to make decisions. You are an agent. And if you use dice to make every decision that you have in life, which is the same thing as basically using, numbers around you. Let's say you got up and you looked at your alarm clock and it was 4:32, and that means this to you, most likely. So you chose to do this, make this life decision based on it. Like, that is not what you should be doing. But you will see these numbers or types of arise in various instances in life, and it's okay to notice them. But I didn't make decisions of like, in the 4th year of this project, I'm going to do, kind of try and release the paper that I will release the paper. I'm not going to try. I will release the paper this year. And when I do, we will go over exactly why it has taken so long, or many reasons of why it's taken so long. Some of them are just personal life issues, but much of them are also just the difficulties and necessities that go into actually writing a paper on the fundamental theory, which I don't think anybody has done yet, to be quite honest. And I wouldn't have said that before really like trying to write this very much more rigorously over the past couple years, because there are things that are involved in this that are, you're going to have synchronicities in this paper that are like really unique. You're going to have extra arithmetic symmetries in any model of fundamental reality, whether it's just a model like here, like what we're looking at, or it's a paper that explains these models. If it's a true model or discussion of or description of fundamental reality, if it's accurate enough, at least, it's going to be, or true enough, it's going to mirror the structures of fundamental reality. And It's also very difficult to do that because you can't really start with anyone else's work, and you can't really avoid starting from a linguistic framework that already exists, but that's also not optimized for writing a paper on the fundamental. And so, people say the true Tao cannot be spoken, essentially, and um, there's something to that too. So you'll never capture completely um, the fundamental reality in a non-fundamental structure. That's why it requires many different models and many different descriptions in order to do it, is because there is no single way to capture the totality of fundamental reality within a non-fundamental context, which is like a paper or a model here or mathematical equation. But the thing is that there are some mediums that are much better at this and that allow you to see reality of what this process is much more clearly and completely, like my use of Excel cells, because you have two things going on at once, where you have to model the internal information being generated, but you also have to model the growth of the structure that the internal information is being generated within simultaneously. So you can't just use it you can't just have equations. You have to have equations within cells that are arranged in relationship with other cells and generated in relationship with other cells that are relevant to this entire process and its totality of growth, of logos, of fundamental generation. And so, Chris Langan says reality is generative. He said that on Kurt Chimungel's discussion with him, and that's so true. What that means, though, is that like you have to generate the medium in which information exists in, which because that is also the part of the information itself. I think Eric Weinstein talks about this when he uses the hands drawing hands MC Escher sketch, or I think it's a drawing, not a painting, and it's he said you need to have a model. Fundamental theory is a model that not only generates one hand generating the other, but it's like he said, the question is, how does the paper generate the hands, or something like that? And it's this metaphor is interesting, but it also is very confusing if you're not thinking about this the right way anyways from the start, which is that sentience already exists and is fundamental. So the paper is creating other sentient beings within itself. That's what's happening. It has intentions. Otherwise, you can't get anywhere. And we'll talk about this more. But one thing that I do want to do, and I'm going to state this publicly here, and because there are so many reasons why I haven't done this, but before I even started this channel, I did an interview with Anton Baker, who was an artist. I think that is. I hope I did not botch his name. Yep. He's a sculptor. And he makes all kinds of sculptures of symmetries, and digital and physical. And they're beautiful. You can check out his Instagram. Definitely check out his Instagram. And I had a great phone call with him. And I wanted to interview him, but he had not done any public interviews at the time. He has done some since. This was 4 years ago. And he didn't want to be his voice or anything on a live stream. But I have it recorded, and he knows that, but he has the whole thing recorded too. But I said that I wouldn't release it directly. I would talk about our discussion, and his mentor in sculpture and symmetry was friends with and mentored by MC Escher, which is very interesting. And I didn't know that even when I asked him if he would speak to me. And he had a very amazing story. And I'd like to just invite him on the stream to just be on live. If he wouldn't do it though, then I will just release a stream on his work, and that kind of goes through my call with him and just has me restate it. But I I saw that he had done other interviews since then, and I was just hoping that would be. I think that would be better, was to actually have him on. So we'll see though. But I will do a stream on his stuff. But MC Escher's hands drawing hands sketch is it doesn't make sense as a metaphor unless you realize that the paper is sentient itself, and that it's drawing other sentient beings in it. And so, which is interesting because that's what it looks like is happening. Hand is connected to someone, and whether that's us or God, and in some ways we are hands of God, but in other ways, so are quarks. So this is it's just interesting to see these symmetries pop up. But symmetries always have meaning, and it's not a question of whether or not they mean anything in your life, or whether or not they mean anything in math. But you need to see that those symmetries on a scale that's more like, ideally you'd want to see symmetry on a 4-dimensional level, essentially, which would be in space and time, which is what we see in our lives with events, like when you meet your spouse and everything just clicks, and for some reason you just it sends you a message. I mean, I wasn't even a theist at the time. I thought that everything was matter and meaningless, but after I met my wife, I saw so many symmetries in her life and mine, and I was just like, I told my brother on the way home on the phone, I said, I have a weird feeling that I might marry that girl. And granted, I did have to choose to do it too. Like, there was intentions there, but it was also, that wasn't why I did it, was because of these symmetries. I just noticed, and it seemed like we were, two puzzle pieces that were meant to fit together. So that's what you see when you see a puzzle piece and another puzzle piece. You'll see a symmetry between them. They'll be opposing, but like also the same, and then they'll be able to fit together. And so I'm not saying look for symmetries in your when you go and look for a spouse. I've already said here there are 4 kind of spousal requirements that you should look for in a spouse, and that's the symmetries will be there naturally, the ones that matter the most, and they'll be different for everybody. Some of them will be, at least. But you need to look for somebody who you can be your true self around. You need to look for somebody who you can, solve problems with. You need to look for somebody who has aligned goals and values. And then there was one more. Somebody that you're just also attracted to, physically, mentally. But if you meet all the 4 of those things, then there will be symmetries naturally there. Don't look for symmetries in that consciously. Look, beauty is symmetry, and numbers and quantities are just about symmetries as well. So quantities occur when you have a certain given amount of symmetries taking place, and so you can even see this in like you look at a compass, and it's like it's got symmetry that and kind of north, south, east, and west. This 4-dimensional symmetrical model, I guess, allows you to orient yourself and on a 2-dimensional plane. And so that's not a coincidence. Why is it not 3? Why don't we just have north, south, and east? But they're like divided into 3 or something, because we couldn't. There's mathematical constraints built into the way that what's going on in a mental structure, or an information structure, which is the same thing, and that is going to dictate symmetry, require certain symmetries, and the presence of those certain symmetries will manifest as quantities, because a symmetry is quantity. So there's bidirectional symmetry, and there's other types of symmetries out there. I went to the reptile show this past weekend, and which is a yearly tradition of mine, and they had all these there was this one vendor there that they had the bugs that were displayed in like picture frames, like butterflies and things like that, like that had died, and just I was just looking at these things, and like what's so amazing about them is their symmetry. Like that's what makes them so beautiful. And there was also a bunch of plants there, and they had orchids, which are my favorite plants. And orchids are interesting because they, as a flower, have like binary symmetry, not so much this not symmetry. They're not. It's not radial symmetry. It's like a binaural symmetry. I don't know. It's what the exact term is. Let's see. Orchid symmetry. So bilateral symmetry, that's what it is. This means that if you were to draw a line down the center of an orchid, the two halves would mirror each other. Okay, so it's an orchid flower. That's actually pretty rare in flowers. I think the other type of symmetry is radial symmetry. Flower symmetry. So here, look at this. Asymmetric, which is not, that's a fluke, but it's not a fluke. It means that there's symmetry that's existing somewhere else. So if there's a weird flower that looks like this, or somebody is born, deformed or something like that, and you're like, their body isn't symmetrical, there's someone else somewhere else that is also going to be able to kind of make up with that symmetry, but it is missing in that individual instance. And that's my theory is that the symmetry would be made up for somewhere else, because it kind of has to be in the grand scheme of a spiraling cosmos. But you have radial symmetry, bilateral symmetry, and bisymmetric symmetry, which is like quadratic symmetry almost, it looks like. But what's interesting is that when you look at these things, you'll see that certain numbers pop up. So like in a symmetry where you split things into 4, you get 90 degrees. When you split things into 5, you get 72 degrees. Or 6, you get 60 degrees. 3, you get 120 degrees. And so you'll see that these numbers occur again and again with each other. So you can see here where while this is when 4 first manifests here in the growth of information, you have 9 as the count it's a 9-cell matrix essentially. So it's like, well, you're getting this there. You see when you bump this up and you go to the cosmological verse, which is the model that's made from this, which leads to this one the creation that I showed you. Then you have the quantum of consciousness that I showed you being generated from that. Then you have this being generated from that, and then it repeats. There's 720 cells in each verse. So here you can see 720 is the count. 720 is the count. So these numbers will occur again and again, and they'll occur in the same kind of instances. And they have the same relationship. So angles and the number of halves that are, or partitions that exist after a certain division or symmetry generation. So this is why so many people think about numbers and synchronicities together. A synchronicity is just the experience of a cosmological symmetry. That's pretty good, actually. I've never said that. I'm going to write that down. A synchronicity is the experience of a cosmological symmetry. Pretty good. That is true, and you'll see that in all of these models. And it's tough though for me to say that I understand any of these numbers where they're meant the generation of these numbers in any kind of total sense, because I don't, because I exist, within just a single partition within creation. I'm not existence itself, but that doesn't mean that you can't see the general patterns and meaning. But um, like I said, though, it's something to notice. It's not something to necessarily um, you know, formulate your life around certain dates because it's important. I talked about this before. My wife and I lost. We had a miscarriage last not last year 2023, but in 2022, my wife's birthday, we had a miscarriage, and like literally while I was out taking her out on a date, uh, and that was very upsetting. But then literally on her birthday of 2023, as soon as it struck midnight, which my wife did not want our child born on her birthday, she wanted her birthday for herself, and I was like, well, it'd be pretty cool if it was, on your birthday, and she didn't want that, and our daughter was due a week later, but she came early, and as soon as it hit midnight, it went from 11:59 to midnight, and we were getting ready to go to bed. My wife's water broke, and so, it literally was essentially like her birthday almost, but like not, because she didn't want it. But and I guess God granted her that. But that was a wonderful thing, And when it happened at the time, last in 2022, when we were out on a date for her birthday, and we ended up having a miscarriage that day, I remember just sitting there thinking, like, what does this mean? And it sucks because we had a death in her family like the year prior, or shortly before that, and we were just distraught. And then I think the next day or later that day, I can't remember, it might have been the same day, we found out that we were pregnant, and I was like, wow, that's wonderful. That almost seems like some type of sign of some type, but I didn't know what, but I noticed it, and I was like, maybe this is gonna work out this time, because we had miscarriages before. Didn't work out, and it was like on her birthday that it didn't work out, and I was like, what is the point of that? What is the meaning of that? And because we can't see the big picture on these things, and so I didn't spiral about it. I just, obviously, if you have a miscarriage on your birthday, you're gonna be like, what is the meaning of this? But then a year later, the moment that it goes from being your birthday to the next day, your water breaks. Might have even broke it like just before midnight. I don't know, but it was like right when the clock struck midnight. And what's the meaning of that? I don't know, but it's a symmetry that with the previous year, and there's some meaning to that. And it wasn't our intention, because we couldn't plan that. Our daughter was due a week later, and but God had other plans, and very grateful for that. But the thing is we're moving through life, and we will never have the big picture until we're gone. So it is important not to just stake too much of this stuff on things like this, and it's also just important to know that, like, beings can change their mind, including God, and so you might seem like something means something in a certain instance in your life, and then it later on ends up not seeming like that, and you kind of just have to recognize that you will never have the big picture until you're done with the material world, and at least until you're done with the material world. So this is why I don't focus on the meaning of numbers too much, but it's also something that you can't avoid. You have to acknowledge it if we're going to actually understand numbers and math and physics and all these other things, and mind on a more fundamental level. We have to understand that symmetry structures of information processing result in quantities which are numbers, and that they occur in certain instances. And if you look at what's happening in those certain instances, it means that that quantity is associated with that specific action. 33 seems to be associated with the specific action of creation. What's another instance that's interesting of that number 33 is that 137, this number, which is prime, first of all, and also essentially the cosmological constant. The heart can lie at, since the 1900s, physicists have postulated that this number could lie at the heart of a grand unified theory relating theories of electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, and especially gravity. 1 divided by 137, which is interesting that it's 1 divided by 137, of course it is, was once believed to be the exact value of the fine structure constant. The fine structure constant, a dimensionless physical constant, is approximately 1 divided by 137. That its reciprocal was, in fact, precisely the integer 137, which claimed to be obtained by pure deduction. Interesting. But, what's interesting is they're measuring these things in labs, and they're like, no, it's not exactly 137. It's like, you're not going to be able to necessarily measure exactly 137 because there's some whenever you see like an irrational number or like an infinite series, like 1/3 is 33.333 repeating percent, or it's 0.3 repeating, or pi is an irrational number. It just is, you're seeing a mathematical measurement that is representative of a dynamic structure, okay? So that is constantly changing and moving. That's why, and growing, you'll see an infinite series or an irrational number. I have a video on here that I recommend watching. It's very old, so my terminology for a lot of things has changed since then. This was well before I even had started this project, but it's called God is an Irrational Number. And creation, you could say creation and God is an irrational number. But 137 is the 33rd prime number, if you don't count 1. And that's not what people will say. People will literally look at that and they will be like, that is a coincidence. Doesn't mean anything. Really? Then math means nothing. That's what that means. Math means nothing. Are you looking for patterns in math, or are you not looking for patterns in math? Do patterns matter in math, or do they not matter in math? You don't get to pick and choose the ones that you like and the ones that you don't. It always matters, or it never matters. And if it never matters, good luck with that. Because why are you even studying anything, if that's what you think? Why is 137 the 33rd prime number in what we observe to be the cosmos, which is creation, which is 1/3 of God's energy? I don't know the entirety of that answer, but I can tell you that it makes perfect sense, or it seems to, or it's unsurprising, and that that would be the cosmological constant is 1 divided by 137, essentially. And it also makes sense that it wouldn't be exact if you were trying to measure it. It would be conceptually exactly 1 divided by 137 probably. But whenever you go to measure it, you're taking a measurement of within a non-fundamental emergent physical material existence in order to determine something about fundamental reality. And you should be happy that it's almost 100, it's 130, 1 divided by 137 at all, let alone like has any decimal points on it. You should expect that, because things are changing. You should expect different results sometimes, depending on who's measuring and when and things like that. Or you should at least maybe expect to forever add to that series in a way, which is like pi. It's like pi is generating as we are being. That's why it doesn't just exist already as a measured quantity the way that we look already. Pi as a concept does, as as a symmetry structure, it does. And that's what pi is. It's a ratio. That's what the Fibonacci sequence kind of really is it's a sequence of it's a generative sequence that ends up resulting in a ratio, an average ratio over time, essentially, that we, that is observed in any structure in which that is generative, like flower petals and things like that, because it's the objective generative sequence of quantities. It's like kind of unavoidable, but you can see these symmetries all over the place, and so obviously 33 means something, and it seems to, in my work, imply that it is related to creation, it is related to self-reflection or self-awareness, and that is, and probably more, but that's at least that. Maybe meaning too, because that's where meaning is manifested. So that, but and if you look this up on a numerological website, I'm sure you would see all this, and maybe we'll do it just to see. But the thing is that we can't be attached to whatever is written here because we don't know how they got it. Numerology.com. I'm trying. I don't want it to come off as me bashing this because that's just ridiculous. I don't like when I say that it matters that 33 is generated by a 3x3 grid. People are like, that's just a math coincidence. I'm not going to be that person either. There's definitely something to why even numerology exists, but I just don't know how they got this information, so I'm not going to. This is secondhand information versus my firsthand information, which we just looked at. Okay. The master's numbers are three very important numerology numbers whose energies impact us in profound ways. Most double-digit numbers don't hold a lot of weight in numerology, but the numbers 11, 22, and 33 are absolutely an exception. It's funny. My friend sent me when I told him that I turned 33 this week, and I told him a story that had happened, and just that was just interesting. That I was. I'll just say this. I'll just talk about it. I was the day before my birthday. I was in the Santa Monica area. And because I live in Los Angeles, I don't live near there, but I was there, and the tallest building in the area is an apartment complex that is 33 stories tall. I didn't know that, but I know the apartment building, and because you can't miss it if you're within 10 miles of it or 20 miles of it, you can probably see it depending on where you are. It's huge, and I was walking by it though, and there was a bunch of cop cars and there was ambulances and everything everywhere, and there was a tent set up over in the area, and I guess a guy had jumped from the penthouse. He didn't live there. He was touring it when it happened, and this guy who lived there came out, and I was like, do you know what happened? And he was like, yeah, a guy jumped from the 33rd floor. And I was like, great, like, why that number when tomorrow I turn 33? And this horrible tragedy happens, like, right next to me. And I didn't see it happen, but I walked up, like, right after it happened. And I was, like, telling a friend of mine about this, and he was like, look at this thing that I posted yesterday, and it was, like, how many, chicks he hatched from his chickens that day, or that year, and it was, like, he had 33 chickens hatched from like 11 males and 22 females, and he was like, what are the odds of that? And I was like, well, probably 100%. And it was interesting because this is somebody that I experience a lot of these like weird symmetries with, where I won't speak to him for a little while, and then all of a sudden I'll check in, and there's like, look at these numbers. But it's not usually that, but they're usually some similar focus. And but he had exactly these numbers that are here now that we're looking at. What are the odds of that? Probably 100%. These three numbers are our connection to the divine, and their enlightened influence is meant to guide and support humanity. The master number 33 is the most advanced on this spiritual path, earning it the grand title of master teacher. Represents pure love. Its heart is made of nothing but bright, warm light. What's interesting, as I said, in the Bible, when it says, let there be light, that's the moment of 1/3 of God's energy is going into creation. It's easy to understand the meaning of 33 if we look at the energy of the numbers it's made of. Interesting. But see, then you have to look at the energy of those numbers. I don't know where they're getting that, you know. I don't know anything about where they get this stuff. I know that people look at like gematria if they're religious, and they look at it in the Bible and things like that. And I know I look at my model and I can see that certain numbers pop up in certain places again and again and again. This one, 33, is one that pops up very specifically and multiple times. 42 pops up very specifically and multiple times. That has very specific implications about what it means. But then there's other numbers that, you know, I'm not exactly sure, but I still see them pop up somewhere, and I can see that the numbers that they are made of make sense, but I don't know exactly what all the specifics of why it's there. But it's there for a reason. You know, for instance, you know, when I look at symmetries on my cosmological verse, it says, you know, I look at like, how do you get a perfect square, and it's in 19 by 19, which is interesting. And you can do two of them because there is no way to do one in the center really, because you go off the map. But it's 19 by 19. And which is interesting because you see numbers like 361, which is like 360. It's like represents like a single complete rotation plus, you know, just enough to get you past it completely. And if you wanted to see like the center of this structure, because it's a chiral structure, so that means if you start at the very top, you scroll all the way down, you'll go off one, so you won't end up right here. You'll end up next to it, which it means like every one is offset, and that's because it's a snapshot of a moving structure. So if you take a picture of a car going down the street, you're seeing the picture isn't going to move, but the car was moving when you took a picture of it. That's this. It's a spinning structure, and you took a picture of it while it's spinning, essentially. And so it's chiral, meaning it looks asymmetric because it's moving. But if you wanted to find the center and you wanted to look at it from a symmetrical standpoint, you have to look from the center out, and that took me a long time to find. And this is the center of this model, which is it's a four-fold center, and that sums to 24. What does that 24 mean? I don't know exactly, but there's lots of things about that number that I can look at and say, okay, well, 2 is 1/3 of 4, and so you have a 2/3, 1/3 type of relationship there. You can also see that which is what you would expect from creation and creator. Creator is 2/3, creation is 1/3, and this occurs again and again. So when this cosmological verse, which is a sentient creation, creates another one within itself at the end of the process, births another cosmological verse, or verse as I call it, or universe you could call it, within itself, it's going to give 1/3 of its energy to create another within itself, and then the next one's going to give 1/3 of its energy to create another one within itself, and this is perpetually happening. And so but so you're getting this constant 2/3, 1/3 structure. You're also seeing that it's fourfold. It's a 4D manifold in a way. It's got 4 cells as the center. You can't do one cell as the center because there's no one in the center of this structure for it to be symmetrical. And I don't know. You look at this. This is the end. This is the number that's calculated at the end of this process. 399. What does that mean? I don't know, but if you add 1 to it, Then you get 400, which is like 4 and 3 places essentially, but it's 4 again. So it's like completeness again once you get it. And so maybe this is internal plus the external is 1. So if you add the singularity of this sentience of this being to this, you get 4 again. But also this 399 is, if we look it up actually, and let's not look it up numerologically, let's look it up because where I like to look things up, 399 and numbermatics, 3 prime numbers, interesting. 3 and 7 and 19. 19 is a number that pops up again and again in this model, because here, when you look at the quantum of cognition that it's made of, you have this sum of these, 4 and 3 and 3 and 2 and 2 and 2 and 1 and 1 and 1 is 19 here. But 19 is also 1 and 9. So this is 1 and also 9 cells in it, 9 squares within how many squares? 1 square. So 9 and 1. So it's very interesting. You're getting this extra arithmetic symmetry happening. I'm not saying I understand exactly what it is, but it's there. And then when you go to this cosmological verse, what you get is, if we're going to look at the symmetries of it, you get bump things up to the next level. 19 by 19 is the biggest square that you can make in it, which is interesting. I didn't do any of this intentionally, and it definitely means something, and it definitely means more than I could ever know. And I definitely probably could tell you a little bit about why these numbers are occurring in these places. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to tell you anything about your life, or mine. It just means that you can tell what's kind of going on in these certain places. And so this is just me looking at symmetries again. If you go and you count also from the center out, interestingly enough, which right here is the center. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and then 19 is kind of the very end there. And the center is this fourfold symmetry, so it's kind of odd. But whereas here the center is kind of represented as 1. But you can see it's the same exact 19 again. Very odd. But also not. Why would this not occur? If you're at the fundamental level, you're going to see symmetries, extra arithmetic symmetries everywhere. Everything is going to be symmetrical, so you're just going to see it all over the place. This makes writing a paper about this stuff very difficult, by the way, because when you translate this into a linguistic description, those same symmetries are freaking everywhere, and it gets kind of just not concise always, but it can be super concise, but you have to figure out how to get it there. But these symmetries are what are responsible for numbers. 1 divided by 1, 1 divided by 2, 1 divided by 3, 1 divided by 4. This is how quantities are generated. And there is no other way to generate quantities. Quantities beyond 1 don't exist at the initial condition of existence. Only 1 exists. It's the only quantity that exists. And this also results in this computational irreducibility type of phenomenon that's, as Stephen Wolfram likes to put it, where you have to go through the steps in order to actually kind of get there. You can't just calculate the answer. You have to generate the answer by going through the process. You can't get the answer but without going through the process. This is very much aligned with the properties that we see of consciousness and learning when it comes to first-hand information, which is true learning. Memorization is for second-hand information. Somebody asked me to explain this. First-hand, second-hand, and third-hand information. What is third-hand information? I don't even know if that exists. Not received directly, but having been passed on by several different people, one after the next. So secondhand is when somebody experiences it and they tell you, and third hand is when somebody experiences and they tell somebody else and they tell somebody else and they tell you, I guess. But really, in my model, the symmetries would suggest that there's really only two ways of getting information. One of them is firsthand, one of them would be secondhand. And so here, third hand means having several different people, but really what ultimately that boils down to is there's two ways to look at information being gained. One of them is you experience it directly, and the other is you get it from somebody else. So it doesn't really matter if they got it from somebody else, or they got it from somebody else, or they got it from somebody else. It's, did you get it from somebody else, or did you get it from yourself, or did you experience it yourself? So there's really only first-hand and second-hand information. But there's first and like third-person perspectives, but they relate to, how we experience space-time. But are you an outside observer or observing as the experiencer themselves? But first-hand and second-hand information, one of them you gain from experience, and experience can be internal experience. It can be I calculated it versus you took the measurements and you calculated it versus, or you even just thought about it and you deduced it. Also firsthand. But if you learned it from somebody else and because they told you, would be secondhand, and that's not as valuable. But it is valuable, but it's not as valuable. It's not orientive. You can't orient on it alone. But yeah, that's what that means. But just firsthand versus secondhand information. I don't know if I had a broader point that I was getting at and I lost my train of thought, but comment in the chat if I did. But you can experience and perceive firsthand quantities and symmetries on a fundamental level. That's where you will experience them. That's what quantities are. And they are also quantities of sentient beings, but even then, that is due to the symmetrical division, or the symmetries generated in the generative partitioning of sentiences that God is doing, essentially. And there are constraints in that result in the certain structures being required for him to do that. And so you'll get certain symmetries in certain places, and that's why you get certain numbers in certain places. And if you, depending on where they occur and what's happening in a fundamental model, you can see that they represent certain things. They also occur in our lives all over the place, and like I said, and we experience them, and they have meaning in certain places, and you'll see them pop up. And so I remember somebody sent me that if you spelled Google phonetically in Hebrew, the gematria value added up to 42. And it's interesting that this is a number that occurs in religious metaphysics and all over the place, and it's 42 generations until you get to Jesus. So he dies at 33, but there's 42 generations between him and I think Adam, and but then which is 3 sets of 14 if you look at the genealogy of Jesus in the New Testament. But then if you watch Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it's what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything, when they ask the AI, it thinks about it and then comes back with 42. And I looked up why that number was chosen many, many years ago by the author, if anybody knew. And because I was maybe chose that because it's in the, it's in the Bible, and it's in the Torah. There are 42 rows in every kosher Torah, which is the Bible, but it's the first five books of the Bible. And it's in a scroll form. And the reason for this is because if you put it on pages and and it's always in Hebrew, and so if you put it on pages and you translate it, then you're changing the number of words and the number of letters and making it more arbitrary. It's not completely arbitrary, but you're making it more difficult to see the original structure, deduce the original structure. And also, if you put it in pages, the number of rows and the number of pages can be arbitrary depending on what size book you want and all kinds of things. And I don't think Bibles have a set number of pages when they're written into a book. It's just, whatever makes sense with the font and it being convenient. But in a kosher Torah, that's not the case. There's 42 rows in every single Torah scroll. And it's a scroll because there's a certain number of columns, and there's a certain number of rows, and there's a certain number of letters, and which make up a certain number of words. And those certain words are in certain spots, and those letters are in certain spots, and those rows are in certain spots in relationship with other rows. So there's so much information, if you believe in Scripture, that the original Torah contains within it. It's supposed to be, basically the blueprints of creation. There's just practically infinite information contained within it, which means it's not just the words that you can read or the meaning of the words that you can read that have been translated. It's also where those words are, comparison to other words, and in relationship with, how far down they are from the top. There's no way you would ever be able to deduce it all. That's why I don't try, and why most people should not. I'm not saying don't notice things when you see them, but just know that you're never going to figure out the world by looking at numbers. You might see numbers when you try and figure out the world. You'll never completely figure out the world, but you can figure out a lot. And but you'll never do it by just looking at numbers. It's not the number that matters. It's the context that matters. I've said it here before. There's, on a fundamental level, there is no such thing as information outside of context. Information on a fundamental level is context. And so a number in and of itself will not tell you anything. You have to see where it pops up. And if it's not obvious where it's popping up and why, then just, I don't know, if you feel like you're seeing a pattern, or you know you're seeing a pattern, that's fine. Good. Notice it. Move on with your life. If it's ever meant for it to be understood by you, it will be. So I try not to dive into numbers in the meaning of them too much, but they definitely do have meaning. Some of them are very obvious to show, have very specific instances in which they pop up in my work, and there's kind of no way to not notice them. And then there's other instances where it's I don't know, I'm just trying to look sometimes at if I just took this one right here, let's say, which is a generative one. I have some that are generative and some that are not. This is a generative one, which means it has equations built into it. Whereas there's other ones that are they don't have equations built in. They're just looking at symmetries from the center out, or symmetries from the middle inward, kind of from here to here and here to here. So I'm just looking at symmetries, and you can see the gradients of the colors here. So I'm looking at symmetry from the center out here. I'm looking at symmetry from the center from the outside and the inside. So this, when you start here and you go in one here and in one here and in one again and in one again, you get the center between the center and the outside edge. It's right here. And so then I just graded the color so you can see it. And it's just very interesting to look at. But if I look at here in the generative model and I just highlight all this, which is just the internal kind of information, I get 9,044 as the sum. And if I wanted to include the beginning and the end, I'm getting 720 as the count, which makes perfect sense. And I'm getting 9,447. What does that mean? I don't know. I mean, I can tell you that 9 is a number that's it's kind of a number of completeness as well, because there are 9 numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Remember, 0 doesn't exist on a fundamental level here, so there's 9. And and then you have 4 and 4, which makes sense as well. I'm not saying that it represents the totality of all of this, but within this model, there's always a relationship between creator and creation, and each mind has 4 primary perspectives that it observes. So there's 4 and 4 between 9 and 7, and that makes a lot of sense in some ways when you start looking at like the periodicity of all this. But I'm not saying that I understand it all, but we can also go to this again, and we can see this 9 4 4 7. This is not numerology, but it will tell us symmetries of this number that can maybe tell us some things about it that are interesting. So it has 3 prime factors, 8 divisors. That makes sense. With my work, even to some degree. 300. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, why does 8 divisors make sense to me? I will just show you. This is also divided into a periodicity here of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But really, this one isn't one of them, because this one is this one. It's just repeating. So it's really like, it depends on how you count. But so each period, these like layers. You can see here, this first one's weird looking because this is also actually this one, but it's coming from this. So the beginning of this one is the end of this one, and the end of this one is the beginning of the next one. And because of that, it kind of jacks it up a bit, but and makes it dependent on how you count. But really, it's 8 periods of consciousness, I think, which aligns with Bott periodicity. And so there's 8 levels, which is 8. It's like divided by 8 divisors. And it's also, like I said, 2 4-dimensional structures, one looking from the inside, one looking from the outside. So the being that you're within and the being that is within. Look, the being that is within looking out, the being that the other beings are being contained within looking in. And so in each one has 4 primary perspectives that it orients around. So because of that intersection between the 4 primary perspectives of us and God, or the universe and us, creation and us, sentient creation, then you get this overlapping 4 by 4, which is 8. And so these symmetry structures are what are responsible for these quantities being generated. But also, it's all built of a 3 by 3 grids, which are 9. So it's interesting that number starts with 9 and ends in 7. 7 is a very interesting number, because if you look at the symmetry structures of this stuff, and you start looking at, like, I don't know, let's look here. This is very interesting. I hope you guys find this interesting. It's kind of just a working session, a review session, but if you want to look at these periods that I just showed you, and some of the mathematical properties of them, because they result in 720 cells when they are complete, and you want to look, let's see, where am I looking here? Like here. Okay. So these are the levels or the periods of sentience, and in totality you have 720. So 720 divided by 1, 720. 720 divided by 2, 360. 720 divided by 3, 240. 720 divided by 4 is 180. And you can see that there's odd meaning in these numbers too. 1 and 8, and 1 and 4 and 4. It's like you're seeing the same different symmetries of the same number happening, because it's the same number, which is 720. And what's interesting is that every single one of these numbers, I believe, you'll be, well, I'll explain it in a minute. Hold on. But it's tough to explain, but you'll see that there's very often 9 is like the number that you can reduce a lot of these down to. But but they're very like simple symmetrical quantity. The quantities that result from them are very simple. 720, 360, 240, 180, 144, 120, except when you get to 7. You get 720 divided by 7, and for some reason you get this, which is an infinite series. And it's like chaos occurs almost. But it's like symmetry is being broken. But it's not really being broken. It's being broken on one level, but reflected inward on a different level. Or it's like symmetry is almost transcending in a weird way into a different space, which would be like the after the decimal space. Symmetry is now breaking, and it's going within instead of it's being on the structure itself. It's also in the information being generated inside the structure. That I don't know exactly how best to explain it, but there's something going on when you reach this level. What's interesting is that's also exactly where we are in this process. Is right here, and we're also experiencing a bunch of chaos. We don't know what this is anymore right here, and we don't know what this is anymore either, and it's chaos. So we're getting chaos. And then once you go to 8, you get neat symmetries again, and 9 neat symmetries again, and 10 you get 72, which is the same exact thing as 720 because on a fundamental level, because remember, zeros don't exist on a fundamental level. So 72 and 720 fundamentally are the same number. And so it's just interesting what you see here, depending on here what number you're dividing by here. These are all numbers that represent symmetry structures, and one of them for some reason seems to break the mold, and it's 7, which is a prime number. Interesting. Symmetries that you can find in prime numbers are incredible. 7 is the 4th prime number, which is exact. It's if you don't count 1. It's that. What are the odds of that? Probably 100%. Sums to 17. Interesting. And then after that, you get 1 and 1, which is weird. It's like one by one looking at itself. It's very odd. Who knows? You can just see all kinds of interesting symmetries in these sequences and prime sequences and differences between prime numbers. And see, when I look at these numbers, sometimes like I will grade them in the properties of these numbers, these sequences, these kind of fundamental sequences. I'll grade them like this with colors because what I'm looking at is symmetries. So you can see there's like a symmetry structure occurring here where that's the center point, and it makes it very easy to see with the colors, and that's why I do that. Not saying that I understand what any of this means. I don't necessarily. Sometimes certain numbers make a lot of sense. Like this one and this one and this one and this one and this one. But as being the center, or kind of, but and that one too. But that doesn't mean I understand it all, and that doesn't mean I ever will, and I won't, is what I assume, and that's fine. I mean, we exist in a dynamic, generative, sentient, sovereign being that is creating constantly and interacting with us constantly, and we are also reflections of that being. And so that lack of staticness, that dynamicness, is definitely something that is going to have to be taken into account whenever you're thinking about what something means, what an equation represents, what the results of an experiment seem to show, you know, what numbers are generated in, you know, in pi, in certain ratios. And, you know, it's just, it's interesting to just look at, though. But 33 comes up a lot, and seems to be related to self-reflection or self-awareness, or reflectiveness, and also related to creation, and probably other things. Let me see what you guys think about all this. Concurrent viewers, 3. Likes, 4. If you haven't, 8. If you haven't hit the like button, please do so. So you might say synchronicity is a function. Okay. My favorite being is being blessed and cursed. Is a curse. Okay. How do you interpret the Buddha exiting the cycle of birth and death? It seems as if he was able to eradicate himself from the whole of existence. I don't know much about Buddha. Honestly, I study the Abrahamic traditions very closely. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I know a lot more about them than I do about Eastern traditions. I see that there's truth in those Eastern traditions, at least the big ones, but I don't know enough about them to really comment. I don't know much about Buddha. But, you know, that's not saying there isn't a lot there. There's definitely is. But it just hasn't really been my focus so far in terms of theological traditions. But I know more about the Western, I guess, traditions. It's interesting that there's 6 of these animating theological traditions in the world. It's like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and then like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Sikhism. And I think that's fascinating. There's something there. You have a Discord. I do have a Discord, JP. I have live streams on there, live calls on there almost every week. They are usually going to be Wednesdays now. They were Thursdays, but now they're Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Pacific. If you want the link to the Discord, please private message me on Instagram and I'll send it to you. Might be annoying. I'm a bit lost, but could you please explain what you're saying about how God has to split 50% and why that isn't viable? Simply put, the significance of 3. If he splits himself up, in order to create multiplicity, God has to be, what he puts into creation has to be smaller than what he's left over with. So, like this, if you take a balloon and you want to put a balloon inside that balloon with air, but you can only take air from the big balloon, essentially, and you have to be on divisions of 1. So you try 1, then you try 2, then you try 3. You can't do like 2.5 because it doesn't exist yet. Because you're starting with super fundamental singularity of 1 existence at that time. There is no numbers that other than just 1, and then you get to 2, and then you get to 3. Conceptually, they don't even exist until God thinks about them. And so first he has to think about, he only is thinking about 1 because there's only 1 of him. Then he has to think about 2. Then he has to think about 3. And he has to go in that order. You can't sidestep that. It's similar to Stephen Wolfram's property of computational irreducibility. Like, you can't get 7 without also going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you don't have the concept of 3 yet, then you can't have the concept of 7. But God splits his energy up, and if he puts 1/3 into creation that fits within 2/3 that's left over, you get this 2/3, 1/3 proportion, but in this split between 2 beings, essentially. So, which would be creator and creation, if that makes any sense. So if you take 1/3 of the air out of one balloon and put it into another balloon, you can put that balloon that you put the 1/3 of that air into it back inside the balloon that with the air that it has left over, which would be 2/3 of its original air. You can't do that with a balloon that let's say you have a balloon, you take 50% of the air in that balloon, you put it into another balloon, and then you try and fit that new balloon inside the other one, and so they both would be the same size. They couldn't fit inside. One couldn't fit inside the other, really, and have a stable structure. You need something with more energy or more beingness to have something with less beingness within it. It's almost like okay, for instance, if you think about energy, let's say you give me, what happens is you end up with the same amount of energy that God has with the same amount of energy that he's able to put into creation. So, or that creation's going to require, and everything that he has left. So basically, it's like having a car that would require 600 horsepower in order to move it, which is, that's like a lot. But at all, move it at all, not just move it fast, but like, we're not talking about speed or anything. We're just talking about getting from a standstill to moving. Let's say it requires 100 horsepower. If all you had was 100 horsepower, then it's not enough, because it's not that it requires 100 horsepower. It requires like more than 100 horsepower, really. But it's like just anything more than 100. It'd be like 101 horsepower, basically. But you don't have that, because you only have an engine that has 100 horsepower. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense at all. It's probably not the best. I'm not doing a good job of explaining it. But you need more energy he needs more energy for himself left over than creation is going to require to be animated. Creation needs to be smaller than he is after his division. So that's why he has to put 1/3 of his energy into creation. It's just a mathematical constraint. It's interesting because it's very dry here. I'm putting up chapstick. Sorry. It's interesting because that model, that creation model, was probably like the most incredible, one of the more incredible experiences that I had with this, because I remember I was listening to just physicists talk about the creation of the universe and how, like, we don't know what it is, how it happened, and they were talking about all these things that really were useless when it comes to this. They're talking about at the beginning of the universe, this is what temperature everything was. And it's like, you're still stuck in relativity. And that's not how you're going to figure out where the universe came from. You have to transcend relativity. And I thought about it, and I was like, there's no way I would be able to do that, though. Like, figure that out. And then I was like, you know what? This project, I wasn't very, very far yet. I was far enough, though, to know that I was able to figure out things that I never thought I would be able to figure out, and that those things were always way simpler than I assumed that they would be, and that it made sense that they would have to be that way. And so I was like, well, actually, I'm thinking about this as it's going to require super complicated math, and I don't know super complicated math. But then I thought about it, and I was like, why would it require super complicated math? You're starting with one existence that always existed by definition, and then you are trying to get multiplicity from that one. This is not going to be the super complicated math. This is going to be the simplest math that you could possibly do. Super simple math. And that, and so I was like, well, maybe I'll just try it. And that night I stayed up super late, just like messing with this and listening to physics podcasts. And I was just like in the zone, and I just like thought from super first principles, like, how would I do this if I was God? Like, and I was like, I'm trying to imagine I'm a sentient being that is existence itself, and there is no one else, and there is nothing else, and I'm everything that exists, and there's only me. There's only oneness, and that's it. How do I go forward? And like, it was actually not difficult. at all. But it took me putting myself in the first person perspective and to reason from first principles. It wasn't like I had to go look through a Hubble telescope or anything, and then make calculations on what the temperature was at the beginning of the this many seconds after the Big Bang. The thing is all of that is within relativity. And it doesn't really matter that much, and it's not going to tell you how the universe was created. You're going to go and you got to try and figure out how the universe was created from the outside in, not from the inside out. And then you got to look from the inside out to see if it lines up with what you would have expected. How you do that is not necessarily by looking at trying to figure out how many seconds there was of this after this and what temperatures. If you did that perfectly accurately, you would be able to do it. But good luck. Maybe we have done it. I don't know. But there's no way for me to assume that. But what you can look at is you can look at symmetry structures, like those in models that are much more tested, like the fundamental particles or the elementary particles, and in the standard model. You could look at that and be like, do we see a 2/3, 1/3 pattern here, or like a binary symmetry where there's also like this like trialicness of one third, that 1/3 and 2/3 would kind of manifest. And so, but because you're ending up with still two beings, creation and creator, you're going to look for something that shows 2/3 and 1/3 at the same time. And if you look at the standard model, you will see the quarks. It's 3 sets of 2 or 2 sets of 3. And same thing with the leptons. When you look at that, also there's up quarks and down quarks, or masculine and feminine quarks, or you could say, or like positive and negative quarks. And then there's neutrinos and electrons, essentially, and so within the lepton. So like this is 4 different categories, which divides into actually, which is within 2 categories, which is the quarks and the leptons. And then you have trialic generationality being observed within each one of those. So like you're seeing exactly the symmetry patterns that you would basically expect to see if you created this model. Like you see in the standard model all these symmetry structures that mirror everything going on here. And so like that implies that this would be accurate. You're not looking, I'm not saying if you looking for temperatures and stuff would be fruitless. This might help you make predictions about like what certain temperatures would be and how much of this type of matter versus this type of matter or is occurring at a certain time. But like you're transferring from the fundamental at that point into the emergent material, and so that it's definitely messier. It's not that, it's more removed. It's more steps removed. So it's not even that it's messier. If you did it accurately, then you would do it. But and it also, I don't know the point of it for me and my work, but somebody should try and figure that out with these models. I hope that people look at my models one day and they figure something out that I never saw. Look at the average of this. 1 and 1/3. Isn't that interesting? 1.33333. So like 1 on the outside, 3, 1/3 on the inside. It's interesting when you look at this is creation. This is like creator. This is like the process. It's like 1 and 1/3 is the average. It's fascinating. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It's very interesting. 137 is the first prime number if you skip 33 prime numbers. Yeah, that's very true. According to this, the best measurement of the number, give or take, is when you take its reciprocal 1 divided by that number. The result is about 137. Yeah, but I'm saying measurements are not going to be the best. They're not going to tell you actually the most accurate number, because they're telling you the most accurate number within the specific context that you're looking at it. Because this number, all ratios come from fundamental structures, fundamental generative structures, or divisional structures, which are the same thing. Division and multiplication are the same action in fundamental reality. So if I give you, if you think about a cell, you're like, how does a cell multiply? It divides. So you're just looking at it from two different perspectives, but it's the same action. Same thing with addition and subtraction on a fundamental level. Let's say you have two plates, one of them has a cake on it, one of them has no cake on it. You want to add cake from the plate that has cake on it to the plate that has no cake on it. What do you have to do? You have to subtract cake from the plate that has cake on it in order to add it to the plate that has no cake on it. So on a fundamental level, addition and subtraction are the same action, just observed from two different perspectives. And same thing with multiplication and division. But on a fundamental level, these ratios structures, or these symmetry which stem from symmetry, they are, when they get transferred into a moment of measurement within the dynamic structure that we're within, that's constantly moving, you're going to see a specific number that might be not exactly as applicable to other instances of measurement, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying that definitely occurs with what you're saying, but I'm just saying makes sense. And when you start really getting into like numbers that are really complicated like that, it's usually because the results are being measured in a relativistic context. But why is it even similar to the same number each time? Why would it be predictively 1 divided by 137? That is going to be, and the fact that it was measured as being very close to that implies that whatever it was that you did to predict the number 1 divided by 137, that's more important than the measurement, probably. Not saying it's not relevant or meaningful or important, depending on what you're trying to do, but you got to just think about your goals. But you will get more accurate by looking at information about fundamental reality by looking at not exact measurements within emergent material observation, if that makes sense. It still matters. It's confirming of whatever the math was that was involved with determining whether that 1 divided by 137 was going to be the cosmological constant. It's supportive of it still. I realized not to use numbers to make decisions 2 weeks ago. Very true. We are the creators of our reality. Make the choice in the alignment of your values. We are the co-creators of our reality. Ultimately, God has sovereignty. He has 2/3 of the energy. We have 1 at most. So in reality, probably less than that. But it doesn't matter, because sovereignty is sovereignty. It doesn't. We're talking about fundamental reality. It's not about like he's 10 times as strong and he's 20 times as strong. It's like, no, he's stronger. That's all that matters. God doesn't have to be a certain amount stronger. He just has to be stronger. And he is, if you have 2/3 of the energy of existence and creation all together, collectively, every cosmological verse or aeon or universe, whatever you want to call it, or the entire multiverse and every being within it, if they all ganged up together on the same side and wanted to rebel against God, we would still not have enough energy to go against his will. We just wouldn't. And he would still have sovereignty over it all. It's like, my geckos over there or something. Like, I built their world. Okay. Find structure constant. Could he beat One Man Punch? The One Punch Man. God could beat definitely the One Punch Man. I don't know who the One Punch Man is. but it sounds like a meme that I'm not aware of. Anyways, if you have not hit the like button, please do. If you have any final questions, let me know. I am very excited about this year. I will say, to wrap up, I want to talk about like going forward, my plans. This year, I will release the paper, hopefully sooner rather than later. It is being worked on. I have made significant progress. I am trying not to put any dates on it because people keep asking me, and I feel bad that it's taken this long. But at the same time, we make plans and God laughs, and sometimes things happen on not our timeline. But I am trying to be diligent about it, and so I will say at least it will be done this year. But I can't give an exact date on when. But I have a goal in my own mind, I will say that, of sooner rather than later. It will be a draft, and it will be an ongoing project once it's done, even still done. I will post it to my website. At that point, I will also share all calculative models on my website so that you could download the Excel spreadsheets and you could mess with them yourself and see what you could find. I will release a video walking through it. I'm going over sentient singularity theory in depth, and I will start talking about an experiment later this year that I want to eventually have done that is taking some effort to figure out exactly the how you would go about doing it. But it does look like we're getting closer to being technologically capable of doing it, and I will reveal what it is this year on this channel. And I also plan on having doing some interviews with some people that I've given commentaries on their other streams that they've done, and I think that those conversations will be awesome. That's going to be kind of the main difference in terms of content. I'm going to try and do a lot more stuff focused on not commentaries, but I will still give commentaries at least once or twice a month. But I'm hoping to at least maybe once a month have release a video of an interview with someone directly, or discussion, I want to say. It's kind of tough because I have to try and figure out a way to make them, unique, and they will be because I am unique, and but I'm trying not to just do what other people have done because I don't think I could do as good a job as what they've done anyways. But I think that there are things conversations with them that I could have that are, not common. And I remember seeing like Eric Weinstein had Garrett Lisi and Roger Penrose on his Portal podcasts, and I remember looking at those too. And he said that his goal was to have a conversation with them, and then for everybody else to just be observing, essentially. And that's kind of what I'm hoping to do, which would not just do an interview, but more of that type of discussion. And I thought those were great, and that's actually like pretty rare. I think as being set out as that being the goal is like not so much just an interview, but there are so many. Got Kurchai Mongol doing his theolocutions, and his interviews are super rigorous and in depth, and then you've got countless other channels doing just general interviews of a lot of these people about many of the same topics, and I would like these to be a bit different, and so I'm working on that. If you have anybody that you would like to see on here, I do have a list of people that I'm going to reach out to. I don't want to say them right now, but you could guess some of them. There are people that I've done streams on their discussions. There's almost nobody on the list, maybe only a couple that I've never given a commentary on their stuff. But if there's anyone that you would like me to specifically have on, and any questions, more importantly, that you would like specifically asked, let me know any way that you can, in the comments down below, in the Discord if you join, in a private message on Instagram, whatever floats your boat. But I would like to, get information, get questions from you guys, and get the answers to those questions if I think they're good questions. If I don't like the question, I'm not going to ask them that. But try, and we will see what happens. If you have any ideas on how you would like to contribute to the project, not just monetarily or through participation in terms of liking these videos, please do, commenting, sharing, participating in the live chat, or there's also Patreon, which I'm very grateful to everybody who has ever been a patron on my Patreon. Has definitely been extremely helpful. But if you have any ideas of you have a certain skill that maybe you hate my thumbnails and you think you could do a better job, which you probably can, let me know, and you could help out with something like that. But I really do appreciate everybody who's been a member of this community for the last 3+ years, 4 years, and I after this year I don't really know exactly where this is meant to go, but I do intend to just continue this basically forever, but it's going to change over time, and but this year is going to be, I think, I plan on it being an important one just because of what the plans are for this channel this year. So have Lex Friedman on and ask him why every time I fall asleep with YouTube on, I wake up and his show is playing. If I ever have Lex on, I will do that, but I don't think that's anytime soon. And it's not somebody that is on the list. I will say that. I like Lex, but I don't have any questions for Lex that I think. I'm just not interested in having him on for a discussion about metaphysics. It's interesting. Okay, yeah. Okay, well, that's that. Like I said, thank you guys. Please hit the like button, and be on the lookout for new content. And if you want to participate in our Discord calls, send me a private message on Instagram. If you'd like to become a patron, Patreon link is below. If you want an overview of this project or of theories of everything in general, there are links below to some of the more important videos that I've made. And with that, I will see you next week. Peace. Happy New Year.